the dusty road leading to Caleb. Thorne's ranch stretched endlessly across the dry prairie, shimmering beneath the harsh afternoon sun. Mary Hale sat stiffly on the wooden bench of the wagon, gripping the edges so tightly her knuckles turned white. Every bump in the road jolted her, but nothing hurt as much as the memory of the laughter she had left behind in the village. Her round face still burned with embarrassment. "The fat widow will do it," someone had shouted. "She's big enough to feed a whole barn of pigs." Another voice had chimed in, followed by cruel chuckles. Mary had lowered her gaze, pretending the words didn't pierce her heart, but they did. Ever since her husband died, the village had treated her like a discarded thing. Too heavy, too quiet, too gentle. They didn't see her as a woman with feelings. They saw her as someone they could mock without consequence. And today they had proved it once again. She had overheard the plan, how Caleb Thorne, a solitary rancher living miles away, had asked for help. Not one of the strong men had stepped forward. Instead, the townsfolk thought it would be hilarious to send her, the widow they always whispered about, as if she were some kind of joke. Make sure she feeds his pigs. A woman had sneered loudly as the wagon rolled away. It's the only thing she's fit for. Mary pressed her trembling hands together to stop them from shaking. She wasn't afraid of work. She'd worked all her life. She was afraid of one thing only, being unwanted again. What if the rancher turned her away? What if he joined the laughter? She didn't think her heart could bear that. The wagon wheels crunched over gravel as the ranch finally appeared, framed by tall fences, roaming horses, and a wide farmhouse whose porch sagged a little at the edges. The land looked vast, lonely, and sun-baked, much like Caleb Thorne himself from what she had heard. A man who kept to himself. A man who didn't smile. A man who supposedly needed help but hated company. Mary swallowed hard. "God, please let him be kind," she whispered, barely audible over the creaking wheels. As the wagon turned onto the ranch path and she caught sight of a tall figure waiting near the gate, her heart pounded painfully in her chest. This moment, this single meeting, would decide everything. Little did she know it would change both their lives forever. Caleb Thorne stood by the split-rail gate, one hand resting on the worn wood, the other shading his eyes against the glare. The wagon approached slowly, kicking up a thin trail of dust behind it. He had expected a farmhand, maybe one of the Miller boys or old Grant, who sometimes took odd jobs, but as the wagon rolled closer, he saw only one passenger, a round, nervous-looking woman clutching a shabby bundle in her lap. Caleb frowned in confusion. A widow? Why would they send her? The driver snorted loudly as he halted the wagon. "Your help's here, Thorne," he shouted with a grin that made Caleb's jaw tighten. "Hope she's good with pigs." Mary flinched visibly at the words. Caleb noticed the shame in her eyes, noticed the way her shoulders curled inward as if she expected another blow. Instinctively, something hot and protective sparked in him. He stepped forward before the driver could say anything else. "That's enough," Caleb said, his voice low but sharp. "I asked for help, not trouble." The driver blinked, startled, his grin faltering. Caleb turned his attention to Mary. She was staring down at her hands, her face red, her breath shallow. Gently, more gently than he'd spoken in months, he reached for her bag. "Let me carry this," he said. Her eyes lifted slowly as if she didn't quite believe kindness was meant for her. I can manage," she whispered. "I know," Caleb replied softly. "But let me anyway." He helped her off the wagon with a steadiness that calmed her trembling. When her feet touched the ground, she kept her gaze lowered, unsure, bracing herself for rejection. Instead, Caleb faced the driver squarely. "Tell the town," he said, each word measured and cold, "that if they ever mock someone on my behalf again, I'll be coming down there myself." The driver swallowed hard. Was just a joke? No, it wasn't. Without waiting for an answer, Caleb lifted Mary's small, worn bag and nodded toward the house. "Mrs. Hale, you're welcome here." The words stunned her. No one had spoken to her with that kind of respect in a long time. As she followed him toward the house, Mary felt the faintest warmth flicker inside her chest, a fragile hope she'd long forgotten, and while Caleb walked ahead, he found himself glancing back at her, wondering why her presence already felt strangely. Right. Mary followed Caleb into the farmhouse, her steps hesitant and quiet. The door creaked softly as he pushed it open, revealing a large but lonely interior. Dust floated lazily in the beams of afternoon light, settling over wooden floors and old furniture that had seen better days. Though the house was sturdy, It carried an unmistakable sense of abandonment, like someone had lived here physically but not emotionally for a long time. Caleb cleared his throat as he led her down the short hallway. "This place hasn't had proper company in years," he said, his voice almost apologetic. "I kept it clean enough to get by, but, well, there's only so much one man can do." Mary shook her head gently. "It's a lovely home," she whispered. She meant it. Even if it was worn and dusty, it felt safe, safer than anywhere she had been in a long while. He paused beside a small room. The door groaned when he pushed it open. Inside was a narrow bed, a wooden dresser, and a window overlooking the barn and the open fields beyond. The blankets were neatly folded, though everything was coated in a thin layer of time. "It's not much," Caleb said, setting her bag down carefully, "but it's yours as long as you want it." Mary stared at the room, blinking hard. She had expected a corner in a barn or a shed, certainly not a real bed in a real house. "Thank you," she breathed, her voice trembling. "You've been kinder to me in 5 minutes than the town has been in 5 years. Caleb shifted awkwardly, unused to praise. "You won't hear cruelty from me, Mrs. Hale, not in my home." Her heart ached at the word home. She had forgotten what that felt like. A few minutes later, Mary rolled up her sleeves and headed to the kitchen. "If I'm staying, I'd like to be useful," she said. "May I cook something?" Caleb hesitated. No woman had cooked in this kitchen since his wife passed. But he nodded. Of course. As Mary moved around the kitchen, the house slowly awakened. The sound of chopping vegetables, the scent of herbs, the bubbling of soup on the stove, all of it breathed life into the silent rooms. Caleb stood in the doorway, watching her with a strange mix of gratitude and surprise. He had asked for help with chores, but what he'd received was something far rarer, warmth. And Mary, for the first time in years, felt like she belonged somewhere again. The days slipped by gently on Caleb Thorne's ranch, each one settling like a warm blanket around Mary's wounded heart. She woke early, cooked breakfast, tended to the garden, swept the porch, mended clothes, small things she had always done. But here they were appreciated. Caleb noticed everything. He didn't speak much, but when he did, his words were steady, sincere, and unexpectedly gentle. Caleb, too, had changed. The man who once carried silence like armor now found himself humming during chores, whistling to the horses, even sharing stories over dinner. Mary's presence had brought color back into the lonely corners of his home and his life. But in town, whispers began to twist and turn. "Caleb's got the widow working like a housewife," one gossip muttered. "He feeds her proper." "She's looking happier," another observed. "Maybe he doesn't mind her size after all," someone snickered. Though without the old cruelty, curiosity spread quicker than the prairie wind. People who had mocked Mary for years suddenly wanted to see what was happening on the ranch, so they came, under the excuse of selling supplies, delivering tools or just passing by. One afternoon, Mrs. Collins, the village baker, arrived with a basket of rolls. She pretended it was a friendly visit, but her eyes scanned the ranch as if searching for evidence of scandal. She found Mary crouched in the garden, planting herbs with her sleeves rolled up and dirt smudged on her cheek. Caleb knelt beside her, guiding her hand as she spaced the roots correctly. "You're leaning them crooked," Caleb teased lightly. Mary laughed, a warm, full sound that carried across the yard. "Well, if you weren't distracting me, they'd be straight." Mrs. Collins froze. She had never heard Mary laugh like that, not once. And Caleb, the man who'd barely spoken to anyone for years, was smiling. Actually smiling? Word spread quickly after that visit. They looked like a proper pair. He wasn't yelling or scowling, just helping her garden. She brings life to that ranch. You can see it plain as day. Suddenly, the same people who had sent Mary away as a joke began to rethink their cruelty. Without meaning to, they had pushed her into a life where she was valued, truly valued. Meanwhile, Mary and Caleb continued their quiet, growing companionship unaware of the shifting rumors. All they knew was that each day felt a little lighter, a little warmer. Something real was blossoming on that ranch, something the town had never expected, and something Mary had never believed she would have again. The morning sun rose slowly over the prairie, painting the sky in soft shades of gold and pale pink. Mary stood by the small window in her room, her hands clasped together, her heart heavy with a decision she didn't want to make. She had slept restlessly, replaying whispers she'd heard in town, snickers, Questions, wild speculations. They're talking about me again, she thought. Only this time it wasn't cruelty alone, it was curiosity, even shock. But Mary couldn't bear the feeling of being the subject of talk again. She had lived too many years under judgmental eyes. She packed her few belongings quietly. The little bag that had arrived with her now held a new warmth. Fresh memories. Comfort. The sound of Caleb's laughter. The peace of the ranch. Leaving it felt like tearing away part of herself. When she stepped into the kitchen, Caleb was already there, pouring coffee into 2 mugs. He looked up and froze when he saw the bag in her hand. "What's that for?" he asked, though he already knew. Mary swallowed. "I think I should return to town," she said softly. "People are talking, and I don't want to cause trouble for you." Caleb set the coffee pot down with a dull thud. "Trouble?" He stepped closer, searching her face. "Mary, you're not trouble. Not here, not to me." She shook her head, tears gathering in her eyes. "They'll say I'm taking advantage, that I forced myself into your home. I can't bear to be a burden." Caleb stared at her, a storm of emotions flickering in his usually calm eyes. Anger at the town, fear of losing her, and something deeper, something he had been slow to admit even to himself. "You listen to me," he said, his voice low and rough with emotion. "Those people sent you here to humiliate you, but you turned this place into a home again." He paused, taking a steadying breath. "Mary, I don't want you to go." She blinked, stunned. "I don't care what they say," Caleb continued. "Let them talk. Let them whisper. It doesn't change the truth." "And what truth is that?" she whispered. Caleb stepped closer, gently lifting the bag from her hand and setting it onto the table. "That you belong here," he said. "With me, if you want that." Mary's breath caught in her throat. Tears spilled freely now, not from shame, but from the overwhelming feeling of finally being wanted. She nodded, unable to speak. Caleb reached out, his large hand enveloping hers with a tenderness that melted every fear she had carried. "Then stay," he murmured. "Stay because this is your home. Stay because you're not alone anymore." And as the morning sunlight filled the kitchen, Mary realized that for the first time in years, her heart had found a place to rest, a place she would not leave again.